The smell of burnt biscuits followed Eleanor Jameson everywhere she went in Columbia, California. And by the summer of 1876, the whole town had an opinion about her failings. She stood in the general store with flour dusting her dark hair and a torn hem trailing behind her boots, trying to count out coins for sugar, while Mrs. Henderson loudly informed anyone within earshot that no man in his right mind would take on such a disaster of a woman. Eleanor pretended not to hear, though her hands shook slightly as she placed the coins on the counter. At 22 years old, she had survived 3 broken engagements, 2 house fires that were entirely accidental despite what people whispered, and the death of her parents in a wagon accident that left her alone with nothing but their small cabin on the edge of town. She had tried to be what everyone expected. She had tried to cook and clean and smile prettily and say the right things at the right times. But somehow, everything she touched seemed to fall apart. And the men who had once courted her had all walked away with the same defeated expression and the same explanation. She was simply too much work. The store owner, Mr. Peterson, gave her a sympathetic smile as he handed over the sugar. "Do not let them get to you, Miss Jameson. You will find your place." Eleanor thanked him quietly and hurried out before Mrs. Henderson could start up again about the time Eleanor had accidentally dyed all her washing pink, or the time she had gotten lost in the woods for 2 days trying to pick berries, or any of the dozens of other incidents that had cemented her reputation as Columbia's most hopeless spinster. The afternoon sun beat down hard as she walked back toward her cabin, which sat a good mile outside town where the forest began to climb into the Sierra Nevada foothills. She liked the isolation, even if it meant harder living. At least the trees did not judge her for burning dinner or tripping over her own feet. She was halfway home when she noticed the smoke. Not cooking smoke, not the gentle curl of a chimney fire. This was thick and black and rising from exactly where her cabin should be. Eleanor dropped the sugar and ran. By the time she reached the clearing, flames were consuming the eastern wall of the cabin, licking up toward the roof with hungry enthusiasm. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind refusing to accept what she was seeing. Not again. Please, not again. But standing there would not save anything. She forced herself to move, running to the well and hauling up a bucket of water. The heat hit her like a physical wall as she approached the cabin, throwing the water at the flames. It hissed and steamed and did absolutely nothing to slow the fire's progress. She ran back for more water, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming from the smoke. She could hear things crashing inside as the structure weakened. Everything she owned was in there. Her parents' wedding photograph, her mother's quilt, the few dresses she had managed not to ruin. "Get back!" The voice came from behind her, deep and commanding, and before Eleanor could turn around, strong hands grabbed her waist and lifted her bodily away from the cabin. She struggled, trying to break free, but whoever held her had arms like iron bands. "Let me go. My things are in there. And you will be in there too if that roof comes down." The man set her down a safe distance away, keeping one large hand on her shoulder as if he expected her to bolt back toward the flames. "Stay here." Eleanor finally got a good look at him. He was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the clearing. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a strip of leather. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see sharp blue eyes assessing the situation with calm focus. He wore buckskin clothing and had a hunting knife strapped to his belt, and everything about him suggested he had walked straight out of the high mountains. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, but he was already moving back toward the cabin with purpose. She watched in amazement as the stranger circled the building, studying it from every angle. Then he grabbed her axe from the woodpile and, instead of fighting the fire, began methodically attacking the western wall of the cabin. "What are you doing?" Eleanor shouted. "You are making it worse." He ignored her, his muscles flexing under his shirt as he swung the axe with practiced precision. In minutes, he had created a large hole in the unburned wall. He dropped the axe and disappeared through the opening into the smoke-filled interior. Eleanor's heart seized. The roof was groaning, timbers cracking under the heat. If it collapsed now, he would be crushed. Seconds stretched into hours. She could not see anything through the smoke. Just as she was about to run in after him despite her fear, the mountain man emerged carrying an armload of her possessions. He dropped them at her feet and went back in. 3 more times he entered the burning cabin, each time emerging with more of her things. The wedding photograph, the quilt, her clothes, even her mother's jewelry box. On his final trip, part of the roof gave way with a thunderous crash just as he dove through the hole in the wall, rolling to safety as flames shot up behind him. He lay on the ground for a moment, coughing, his face smudged with soot. Eleanor ran to him without thinking, dropping to her knees beside him. "Are you hurt? You could have been killed." He sat up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 at most. His blue eyes were startlingly clear against his tanned skin. "I am fine." His voice was rough from the smoke. He looked at the cabin, which was now fully engulfed. Nothing more to be done for that. It will burn itself out. They sat together in the dirt and watched her home collapse in on itself. Eleanor knew she should be crying, should be devastated, but she felt oddly numb. This was just one more disaster in a long line of disasters. Of course, her cabin had burned down. Why would anything in her life be easy? "Thank you," she said finally, "for saving my things. You did not have to risk yourself like that." The mountain man turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. "Looked like you could use some help." That is the understatement of the century. Eleanor laughed, though it came out slightly hysterical. "I am Eleanor Jameson, Columbia's resident catastrophe." "Declan Lawson." He offered her his hand, and she shook it, noticing how her entire hand disappeared in his massive grip. "I trap in the high country, came down to trade furs and heard the commotion." "Well, you certainly got more excitement than you bargained for." Eleanor looked at the pile of belongings he had saved. "I do not know how I can repay you. I do not have much, as you can probably tell." Declan was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You got anywhere to go? Family in town?" "No family. And the town—" Eleanor trailed off, not wanting to admit that she would likely not be welcome on anyone's doorstep. "I will figure something out." "Got a cabin up in the high country," Declan said slowly. "About a day's walk from here. It is isolated, but it is sturdy and there is plenty of game and water. You could stay there while you sort out what comes next." Eleanor stared at him. "You are inviting me to your cabin? But you do not even know me. I know you just lost your home, and I know nobody deserves to be sleeping rough when there is shelter available." Declan stood, offering her his hand again to help her up. No strings attached, just a place to catch your breath. Every sensible instinct Eleanor possessed told her this was a terrible idea. Going into the mountains with a complete stranger was exactly the sort of thing that got women killed in cautionary tales. But as she looked at the smoking remains of her cabin and thought about returning to Columbia, where everyone would click their tongues and say they had known something like this would happen, the mountain seemed like a far more appealing option. "All right," she said. taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. But just until I can figure out my next step. Something that might have been approval flickered across Declan's face. Fair enough. We will rest here tonight and head out at dawn. I have camp supplies in the tree line. True to his word, Declan had a well-organized camp set up just inside the forest boundary. He built a fire with quick efficiency, and Eleanor watched his hands move with practiced ease, noticing the scars that crossed his knuckles and the calluses that spoke of hard physical labor. He was not a man who had lived softly. He made coffee in a battered tin pot and offered her hardtack and dried meat, apologizing for the sparse fare. Eleanor, who had not eaten since breakfast and who regularly survived on her own burnt cooking, thought it was the best meal she had tasted in weeks. "How long have you been in the mountains?" she asked, hoping conversation would distract her from the fact that her entire life had just gone up in smoke. "About 8 years now." Declan poked at the fire with a stick. "Came west after the war. Did not much feel like settling down in civilized parts." Eleanor did the math. That would have made him barely more than a boy when he went to fight. She wondered what he had seen, what had driven him to isolate himself in the wilderness. But his expression did not invite deeper questions. "Is it lonely?" she asked instead. "Being up there by yourself?" Declan considered this. "Sometimes. But it is peaceful. No one telling you what to do or who to be. Just you and the mountain and the work of staying alive." "That sounds nice," Eleanor said wistfully. "Everyone in Colombia has very strong opinions about who I should be, mostly someone I am not." "Why is that?" Eleanor laughed, gesturing at the ruined cabin. "Because I am a walking disaster. I burn everything I cook. I got lost in the woods trying to follow a trail a child could manage. I once accidentally poisoned half the church congregation with elderberry pie because I used the wrong berries. 3 different men tried to marry me, and 3 different men decided I was too much trouble to deal with." She expected him to look uncomfortable or to make excuses to retract his invitation. Instead, Declan just nodded thoughtfully. "Elderberries do look similar to pokeweed berries if you do not know what you are looking for." Easy mistake. Eleanor blinked. "You're not going to tell me I should have been more careful?" "Should you have been more careful? Probably. But mistakes happen. You learn from them and move on." He refilled her coffee cup. "As for getting lost, those woods are trickier than they look. Got turned around in them myself once when I first came here." "You did?" "Spent a cold night under a pine tree before I found my way out." He grinned, and it transformed his serious face into something unexpectedly warm. "Felt pretty stupid, but I learned to pay better attention to landmarks." Eleanor found herself smiling back. "You are taking this very calmly. Most people act like my disasters are personal affronts to their existence. Not my place to judge. Everyone has their struggles." Declan settled back against a log. "Besides, you kept trying to run back into that burning cabin. Takes courage to do that, even if it is not the smartest choice. Or stupidity. Courage and stupidity often look the same in the moment." His blue eyes caught the firelight. "The difference is whether you learn from it." They talked late into the night, and Eleanor found herself telling this stranger things she had never admitted to anyone in Colombia. How she had tried so hard to be the perfect daughter, the perfect potential wife. But her mind wandered at crucial moments, and her hands never quite did what they were supposed to do. How she felt broken and wrong, like everyone else had received instructions for how to be a proper woman, and hers had gotten lost in the mail. Declan listened without interrupting, and when she finally ran out of words, he said something that made her heart squeeze in her chest. "Maybe you are not broken. Maybe you are just trying to be something you were not meant to be. Eleanor fell asleep that night, wrapped in her mother's quilt, with those words turning over and over in her mind. They set out at dawn with Eleanor's belongings bundled into a pack that Declan carried as if it weighed nothing. He moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and rock, maintaining a steady pace that ate up the miles without being exhausting. Eleanor struggled to keep up at first, her town boots not meant for serious hiking, but she was determined not to slow him down. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Columbia was just a distant smudge in the valley below. The air was cooler here, scented with pine and wildflowers, and Eleanor found herself breathing deeper than she had in months. "How much farther?" she asked during a rest stop beside a rushing creek. "Another few hours. The cabin is in a valley between two peaks. Good hunting, good water, and far enough from civilization that you do not get unexpected visitors." Declan refilled their canteens. "Fair warning, it is rustic. I built it myself, so it is sturdy, but it is not fancy. After watching my cabin burn down, I promise I will not be picky." They continued climbing, and Eleanor found herself watching Declan's broad back as he navigated the terrain ahead of her. He moved with an animal grace that seemed at odds with his size, his long legs covering ground effortlessly. Every so often he would stop and wait for her to catch up, never showing impatience, sometimes pointing out a deer track or an eagle circling overhead. "You really do know these mountains," Eleanor said, after he identified a plant she could use for tea. "You spend enough time in a place, it becomes part of you." Declan helped her over a fallen log. "The mountain takes care of you if you learn its ways." "Did you have someone teach you, or did you figure it all out yourself?" "Bit of both. Met an old trapper named Gus when I first came up here. He showed me the basics before he passed. Rest I learned through trial and error." His expression grew distant. "Made plenty of mistakes in the beginning. Nearly starved my first winter because I did not smoke enough meat. But the mountain is a patient teacher if you pay attention." Eleanor thought about that. The mountain did not judge you for making mistakes. It just presented the natural consequences and let you learn. Maybe that was why Declan seemed so comfortable with her disasters. He understood that failure was just part of the process of figuring things out. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks when they finally crested a ridge, and Declan pointed down into a small valley. "There, that is home." The cabin sat beside a clear lake that reflected the surrounding mountains like polished glass. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, built from thick logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Around it were various outbuildings, a good-sized vegetable garden, and what looked like drying racks for meat and furs. Smoke rose from the chimney in a lazy curl. "You left a fire going?" Eleanor asked. Declan shook his head, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "No, someone is there." They approached cautiously, but before they reached the cabin, a shaggy gray dog came bounding around the corner, barking joyfully. Declan relaxed immediately, kneeling to accept enthusiastic licks from the animal. "That is Thunder, my dog." He scratched behind the dog's ears. "Which means the person inside is probably—" The cabin door opened, and a Native American woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked to be in her 50s, with silver streaking her dark hair and a face that held both wisdom and humor. "About time you got back," she said in perfect English. "I was beginning to think a bear got you." "Netta." Declan stood, and there was genuine affection in his voice. "Did not know you would be visiting. Brought you smoked salmon. Your garden is growing well." Her sharp eyes moved to Eleanor, assessing without judgment. "You brought company." This is Eleanor Jameson. Her cabin burned down in Colombia. She is going to stay here while she figures out her next steps." Declan's voice was casual, but Eleanor sensed he was watching the older woman carefully. "Eleanor, this is Nada. Her people have lived in these mountains since before anyone can remember. She checks on me sometimes to make sure I've not done anything too stupid." Nada's lips quirked. "A full-time occupation." She nodded to Eleanor. "You are welcome here, Eleanor Jameson. Any friend of Declan's is a friend of mine." Eleanor felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She had not realized how worried she was about meeting someone from Declan's life until the moment had arrived. "Thank you. And thank you for looking after things while he was gone. The garden needed weeding anyway. Come inside. You both look hungry." The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than the exterior. One large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led up to a sleeping loft, and Eleanor could see a separate bedroom partitioned off at the back. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, and everything was surprisingly clean and organized. Netta had a pot of stew simmering over the fire, and she dished up generous portions while Declan stowed their gear. Eleanor sat at the rough, hewn table and felt exhaustion wash over her now that they had finally stopped moving. "Your cabin burned down?" Netta asked, setting food in front of her. "That is hard luck." "It seems to follow me around," Eleanor admitted. "This is actually the second cabin I have lost to fire." "Then perhaps you should learn to build with stone." Nada's eyes twinkled. "Or stay somewhere that someone else maintains the fires." Declan came back from putting away the packs and sat down across from Eleanor. She saved a bunch of her things from the fire. Could have been a lot worse. "Actually, Declan saved them," Eleanor corrected. "He ran into the burning building multiple times while I stood there uselessly." "Not uselessly. You tried to fight the fire alone before I got there." Declan said it matter-of-factly, as if running into burning buildings was just something one did on a regular Tuesday. That took courage, even if it was not very effective. Nita looked between them with an expression Eleanor could not quite read. "Well, it seems you two have already had quite an adventure together." They ate dinner, while Declan caught Nita up on news from Colombia, and Eleanor answered questions about how the town had changed since Nita's last visit. The older woman had a dry sense of humor that made Eleanor laugh despite her exhaustion. And by the time they finished eating, Eleanor felt more relaxed than she had in months. "I should head back before dark," Netta said, standing and removing her apron. "My grandson will worry if I'm gone too long." "Stay the night," Declan offered. "Head back in the morning when you can see the trail properly." No. The moon is bright and I know this path better than I know my own face." Netta gathered her things, then paused beside Eleanor. "You will be safe here. Declan is a good man, even if he does hide from the world in his mountain valley." "I do not hide," Declan protested. "I just prefer solitude." "Same thing." Netta patted his cheek affectionately. "Take care of your guest. She looks like she needs some peace and quiet." After Netta left, Declan showed Eleanor around the cabin properly. The bedroom at the back would be hers, he explained. He would sleep in the loft as he usually did. There was a spring house built over a cold stream for keeping food fresh, a smokehouse for preserving meat, and an outhouse that was surprisingly well maintained. "You really have built a whole life up here," Eleanor said, impressed despite herself. "Takes work, but it is worth it. No one bothering you about things that do not matter. Just you and the rhythm of the seasons." Declan hauled water from the well to fill the basin inside. "You should rest. It has been a long day." Eleanor did not argue. She washed the trail dust from her face and hands, changed into a clean dress from the belongings Declan had saved, and collapsed onto the bed in the small bedroom. The mattress was stuffed with something that smelled like pine needles and herbs, and the quilt covering it was thick and warm. Through the small window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She expected to lie awake worrying about her future, but instead she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night and the knowledge that, for the first time in a long time, she was somewhere she did not have to prove herself to anyone. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back. Her cabin burning. Declan appearing like something out of a legend. The long walk into the mountains. She dressed quickly and emerged from the bedroom to find Declan at the stove, cooking breakfast. He had tied his hair back and rolled up his sleeves, and Eleanor found herself momentarily distracted by the play of muscles in his forearms as he flipped flapjacks. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee is on the table. Hope you are hungry." Eleanor poured herself a cup and sat down, watching him cook with the same calm efficiency he seemed to bring to everything. "Do you always cook breakfast for your house guests?" "Do not usually have house guests, but I do cook breakfast for myself, so it is not much extra work to make more." He plated the flapjacks and brought them to the table along with a jar of honey. "These are made with acorn flour. Takes some getting used to if you have never had them before." Eleanor took a cautious bite and was surprised to find they were delicious, with a slightly nutty flavor that complemented the honey perfectly. "These are really good." Recipe from Netta's people. They have been making them for hundreds of years, so they have had time to perfect it. Declan ate his own breakfast standing up, leaning against the counter. "I usually spend mornings checking the trap lines and tending the garden. You are welcome to come along or stay here and rest. Whatever you prefer." Eleanor considered. The idea of having nothing to do but rest was tempting, but she also did not want to be a burden. "I will come with you. Might as well learn what needs doing around here." Something like approval crossed Declan's face. "All right then. Fair warning, the trap lines cover a lot of ground. It is a solid few hours of walking." They set out after breakfast with Thunder bounding ahead, clearly delighted to have his person back. The trap lines formed a wide circuit through the surrounding forest, and Declan checked each one methodically, resetting those that had been sprung and collecting the occasional rabbit or squirrel. "I mainly trap for food," he explained as he worked. "Trade furs sometimes when I need supplies I cannot make myself. But I take only what I need and let the rest be. The mountain provides plenty if you are not greedy." Eleanor watched him handle the animals with respect, dispatching them quickly when necessary, and thanking them quietly before adding them to his game bag. It was so different from the way the hunters in Colombia talked about their kills, all bravado and competition. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "The killing?" "Some, but it is part of the bargain. The deer eats the grass, the mountain lion eats the deer, and I eat both when I need to. Everything gives and everything takes. The wrong is in taking more than you need or causing unnecessary suffering." He reset a trap with practiced hands. "The war taught me a lot about unnecessary suffering. I do my best not to add to it." They continued in comfortable silence, and Eleanor found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the walk. Declan pointed out various plants and their uses as they went, showing her which berries were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the forest, accumulated through years of close observation and hard-learned lessons. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was high overhead, and Eleanor's legs were aching from the unfamiliar exercise. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from honest work rather than frustrated attempts at tasks she could never quite master. "You did well," Declan said as they entered the cabin. "Some people cannot handle that much walking their first day in the mountains." Eleanor felt an absurd flush of pleasure at the simple praise. "I am tougher than I look. Have to be, considering my life." "I believe it." Declan set down the game bag and began the process of cleaning and preparing the animals they had caught. "You hungry? Can make a quick lunch before I start on the afternoon work." "What is the afternoon work?" "Garden needs weeding. Fence on the chicken coop needs mending. Gotta split more firewood before winter comes." He saw her expression and smiled. Mountain living is never done. There is always something that needs attention. "Let me help with the garden," Eleanor offered. "I might not be able to cook without starting fires, but I can pull weeds." They spent the afternoon working in companionable silence, with Eleanor tackling the weeds while Declan mended the fence. The sun was warm on her back, and the soil was cool between her fingers, and Eleanor found a meditative quality to the work. Pull the weed, check for roots, toss it aside. Simple, straightforward. No way to mess it up. "You are good at this," Declan observed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hard to ruin weeding." Eleanor sat back on her heels, surveying her progress. "Give me something more complicated, and I will find a way to make a disaster of it." "I doubt that. You just need to find work that suits how your mind works." Declan hammered another nail into the fence. "Forcing yourself into someone else's idea of what you should be never works out well." Eleanor thought about her 3 failed engagements. All 3 men had been perfectly nice, but all 3 had wanted her to be someone she was not. Quieter, more domestic, less curious about things that were not her concern. She had tried, truly tried, but in the end, she could not sustain the act. "The last man who left me said I was too much work," she admitted. "Said loving me was like trying to hold water in your hands. Everything just kept slipping through no matter how hard he tried." Declan was quiet for a long moment. "That says more about him than you. Some people think love is about control, about shaping another person into what they want. Real love is not like that." "What is real love like then?" He met her eyes across the garden. "Like breathing. Something you do not have to think about because it is natural. Something that keeps you alive." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, though she could not have said exactly what. She turned back to her weeding before Declan could see the color rising in her cheeks. The days settled into a pattern. Mornings checking trap lines, afternoons working around the cabin, evenings cooking dinner together and talking by the fire. Eleanor learned to identify animal tracks and navigate by the sun. She learned which plants made good tea and how to preserve meat in the smokehouse. She learned that Declan had fought for the Union at 17 and had seen things that still woke him sometimes in the night, though he never spoke of them directly. In turn, she told him about her parents, who had loved each other with a fierce devotion that Eleanor had always hoped to find for herself. About growing up in Colombia when it was still rough and lawless, before the mines started playing out and the town began its slow decline. About her dreams of doing something meaningful with her life, though she had no idea what that might be. "You are still young," Declan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Plenty of time to figure out what matters to you." "I am 22. Most women my age are married with children. Most women your age did not have their homes burned down twice and end up living in the mountains with a hermit." His eyes crinkled with humor. "I would say you are on a different path than most." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "That is one way to put it." Thunder lifted his head from where he had been dozing at Declan's feet, ears suddenly alert. A moment later, Eleanor heard it too. Hoofbeats approaching up the mountain trail. Declan stood, his relaxed posture shifting into something more wary. Not expecting anyone. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized them. Samuel Grant, her second failed fiancé, flanked by 2 of his friends from Colombia. Samuel was handsome in a conventional way, with carefully styled blonde hair and clothes that were too fine for mountain travel. "Well, well," Samuel said, dismounting with theatrical flair. "We heard a rumor that Eleanor Jameson had run off into the mountains with some wild man. But I did not quite believe it until now. What do you want, Samuel?" Eleanor stayed on the porch, very aware of Declan's solid presence beside her. "To save you from making a terrible mistake, obviously." Samuel's eyes moved dismissively over Declan. "Whatever this man has told you, whatever promises he has made, you need to come back to town where you belong. People are worried about you." "People are gossiping about me, you mean?" Eleanor crossed her arms. "And I am fine here, thank you. Better than fine, actually." "Eleanor, be reasonable. You cannot just live in the mountains like some savage. What will people think?" "I do not particularly care what people think anymore." Samuel's expression hardened. "That is clear, given the company you are keeping. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That you have lost your mind, that this man has bewitched you somehow. Your reputation is in tatters." "My reputation was already in tatters," Eleanor pointed out. "You helped with that when you told everyone I was too much work to marry." "I was frustrated and spoke poorly. I apologize for that." Samuel tried a different tack, his voice softening. "But Eleanor, this is not the answer. Come back to town. We can figure something out. Perhaps another engagement, with clearer expectations this time." "No, thank you. I am happy where I am." "Happy? Living in a shack in the middle of nowhere with a man you barely know." Samuel laughed incredulously. "This is insanity." Declan, who had been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made Samuel's friends shift nervously. "The lady has made her choice. Time for you to respect it and leave." "I was not speaking to you," Samuel snapped. "This is between Eleanor and me." "No, it is not." Eleanor stepped forward. "There is no Eleanor and you, Samuel. There has not been for over a year. You ended things, remember? And now I have found somewhere I actually belong, and you do not get to show up and tell me I am doing it wrong." "Somewhere you belong?" "Eleanor, look at yourself. Your dress is covered in dirt, your hair is a mess, you probably smell like wood smoke and animal pelts." Samuel shook his head in disgust. "This is not you." "You are right," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "The woman trying to be perfect and proper and everything you wanted, that was not me. This is me, and I like her a lot better." Samuel's face flushed red. "Fine. Ruin yourself if that is what you want. But do not come crying back to Colombia when this mountain man gets tired of you and throws you out. No one will want you then." "Then I will keep living in the mountains," Eleanor said simply. "Now leave. You are not welcome here." For a moment, she thought Samuel might try to physically force her to come with him. His hands clenched into fists, and he took a step forward. But Declan moved too, positioning himself between Samuel and Eleanor with fluid grace. He did not say anything. did not make any threatening gestures, but his sheer size and the calm warning in his eyes made Samuel reconsider. "This is not over," Samuel muttered, but he was already backing toward his horse. "You will see reason eventually." They mounted up and rode off, and Eleanor realized she was shaking. Not from fear, but from anger and the adrenaline of confrontation. "You all right?" Declan asked quietly. "Yes. No. I do not know." Eleanor sat down heavily on the porch steps. "Why did he even come? We have been done for over a year. Why does he suddenly care? Men like that do not like losing control, and you not needing him anymore means he does not have control." Declan sat beside her, leaving enough space to be respectful but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "He will not be back. He got what he came for." "What did he come for?" "To prove to himself that you are making a mistake, and you showed him you are not. That will eat at him for a while, but eventually he will move on to someone else he can mold into what he wants." Eleanor looked at Declan's profile, silhouetted against the fading light. "Do you want to mold me into something?" He turned to meet her gaze. "No, I like you exactly as you are." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Eleanor's heart beat faster, and she saw Declan's throat bob as he swallowed. "I should get dinner started," he said finally, standing. "Unless you want to?" "Absolutely not. I will just burn it." Eleanor tried to inject some lightness back into her voice. "I will set the table instead. That is something I can usually manage without catastrophe." But that night, as Eleanor lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she could not stop thinking about the way Declan had positioned himself between her and Samuel. The quiet protectiveness of it. And more than that, the way her heart had skipped when he said he liked her exactly as she was. She was falling for him. Maybe had been falling for him since the moment he pulled her away from the burning cabin. And that was terrifying, because she had failed at relationships so many times before. But it was also exhilarating because for the first time, someone was not asking her to be anything other than herself. The next morning dawned gray and threatening rain. Declan eyed the clouds with a practiced gaze over breakfast. Storm coming, probably hit by this afternoon. He drained his coffee. Need to get the animals secured and make sure everything is battened down. Could be a big one. They spent the morning preparing, moving the chickens into their reinforced coop, securing loose items that might blow away, and checking that the cabin roof had no weak spots. Thunder stuck close to Declan's heels, anxious in the way animals get when they sense approaching weather. The first drops began falling just as they finished securing the last shutter. Within minutes, it had intensified into a downpour, rain hammering against the cabin roof with drumming insistence. Lightning flickered across the valley, followed by the rolling boom of thunder that made the windows rattle. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the storm transform the peaceful valley into something wild and primal. The lake churned with wind-driven waves, and the trees bent and swayed like dancers. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "We get these sometimes in late summer," Declan said, coming to stand beside her. "Mountain storms are fierce, but they usually pass quickly." But this one did not pass quickly. It raged all afternoon and into the evening, the rain never letting up. Water began to seep under the door, and Declan stuffed rags along the threshold to keep it out. The temperature dropped as the storm continued, enough that he built up the fire higher than usual. "At least we are not sleeping rough," Eleanor said, trying to find the positive side. "Imagine being caught in this out in the open." "I have been. It is not pleasant. Declan checked the fire. But the cabin has weathered worse. We are safe here. The word "we" sent a warm feeling through Eleanor's chest. When had it become "we"? When had she stopped being a temporary guest and become part of the fabric of this mountain life? They ate a cold dinner, not wanting to risk opening the door to get to the smokehouse. The storm showed no signs of abating, and as night fell, it only seemed to intensify. The wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, and Eleanor found herself jumping at every loud crack of thunder. "You all right?" Declan asked, noticing her tension. "Storms make me nervous, ever since the wagon accident." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "My parents died in a storm like this. The road turned to mud and the wagon overturned. I should have been with them, but I had stayed behind in town because I was sick." Declan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "That must have been hard, losing them both at once. The worst part is that I felt guilty for being relieved. Relieved that I was not in the wagon when it crashed. What kind of person feels relief about something like that? The kind who is human. Grief and guilt get all tangled up sometimes. Does not make you a bad person." Declan's voice was gentle. "You were just a kid. You were allowed to be glad you survived." A particularly violent gust of wind shook the cabin, followed by a tremendous crash from outside. Thunder started barking frantically, and Declan was on his feet immediately, grabbing a lantern. "What was that?" Eleanor asked. "Something fell. I need to check that nothing vital is damaged." He pulled on his oilskin coat. "Stay here. I am coming with you. Eleanor, it is dangerous out there. And you might need help. 2 people can work faster than 1. She was already putting on her own coat, which Declan had loaned her. "Besides, I am tired of being the person who stays behind while others do the hard work." Declan looked like he wanted to argue, but another crash from outside made up his mind. "All right, but stay close to me and watch your footing. The ground will be like a river out there." He was not exaggerating. The moment they stepped outside, rain lashed at them with stinging force. Eleanor could barely see 3 feet in front of her face despite the lantern Declan held high. Water flowed everywhere, turning the usually level ground around the cabin into a maze of streams and puddles. They found the source of the crash quickly. A large pine tree had been struck by lightning and had fallen across one corner of the garden, crushing part of the fence and narrowly missing the chicken coop. "Could have been worse," Declan shouted over the wind. "But I need to make sure it did not damage the coop's roof. If water gets in, the chickens will freeze." They slogged through the mud to the chicken coop, thunder splashing along behind them. The coop had escaped major damage, but water was starting to pool around the foundation. Declan set down the lantern and began digging a drainage trench with his hands, channeling the water away from the structure. Eleanor knelt beside him and started digging too. The mud was cold and thick, clinging to her hands and soaking through her skirts. Lightning illuminated the valley in stark flashes, and thunder crashed so loudly she felt it in her bones. But Declan worked with steady determination beside her, and she matched his pace, refusing to give up, even as her arms ached and her fingers went numb. It took nearly an hour to dig the trench and shore up the weakest points in the coop's walls. By the time they finished, both of them were covered in mud from head to toe, shivering despite their heavy coats. "Inside," Declan ordered, practically pushing Eleanor toward the cabin. "Before you catch your death." They stumbled through the door and stood dripping on the threshold, too muddy to go any further. Thunder shook himself vigorously, spraying water everywhere. "We need to get you into dry clothes," Declan said, his teeth chattering slightly. I will heat water for washing. You too. You are just as cold as I am. They took turns washing off the worst of the mud in the basin, while the other changed in privacy. Eleanor's hands were shaking so badly from the cold that she could barely work the buttons on her dress. When she finally emerged from the bedroom in her warmest nightgown with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, she found Declan feeding the fire, dressed in dry clothes with his wet hair hanging loose around his shoulders. He looked up as she approached. How are your hands? Cold? But I will live. Eleanor held them out toward the fire, relishing the warmth. Thank you for letting me help. I know you probably would have been faster without me. Maybe. But it was good having someone to work beside. Declan poured hot coffee and pressed a cup into her hands. You did not complain once, even though I know you were freezing. Mountain life, right? Always something that needs doing. Eleanor smiled at him over the rim of her cup. I am starting to understand why you love it up here, even with the storms and the hard work. Why is that? Because everything makes sense. The work you do matters in obvious ways. Dig the trench, save the chickens. Set the trap, get food. It is straightforward. No games, no pretending to be something you are not. She paused. And the mountain does not care if you are too much work. It just is. And you just are. And you figure out how to work together. Declan was looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Eleanor, yes? When you first got here, you said you would stay just until you figured out your next step. His voice was careful. Have you figured it out yet? Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment. She could deflect, could keep things safe and undefined. Or she could be honest. I have, she said quietly. My next step is to stop running from what I want because I am afraid of failing at it. And what do you want? She met his eyes. I want to stay here. With you. If you will have me. The storm raged outside. But inside the cabin, the silence between them was profound. Declan set down his cup carefully, as if he was afraid sudden movement might shatter something fragile. Eleanor, you need to understand something. I am not like the men you knew in Colombia. I do not know how to be charming or say pretty things. I live a hard life in a hard place, and the winters up here can be brutal. You would be isolated from everything you have ever known. I know all that. And I have demons from the war that I am still fighting. Sometimes I wake up thinking I am back in the mud at Petersburg, and it takes me a while to come back to myself. I am not an easy man to love. Eleanor stood and crossed the space between them, still wrapped in her blanket. She looked up at him, at this strong, scarred, gentle man who had saved her things from the fire and taught her about the mountain and never once made her feel like she needed to be anything other than herself. They said I was too much work, she said softly. Every man I tried to love said I was too difficult, too clumsy, too distracted. That loving me was exhausting. Declan reached up and cupped her face in his large, work-roughened hand. Then they were fools. Loving you is the easiest work I will ever do in my life. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. You mean that? Every word. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. You are brave and kind and funny, and you did not give up even when you were freezing in the mud. You ask questions about everything and you are not afraid to make mistakes. You make me laugh. You make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. You make me want to come down from the mountain sometimes, just to show you more of the world. Declan. She did not have words for what she was feeling, so she did the only thing that made sense. She stood on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, he went still with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her soul ache. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke, and he was so warm and solid against her. The blanket fell from her shoulders, but she did not care, too focused on the way his hands cradled her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day you argued with me about coming back into the burning cabin for one more load." Eleanor laughed breathlessly. "Really? That is what did it for you? You were furious and covered in soot and completely fearless. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." He pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Stay, Eleanor. Not as a guest, but as my partner. Build this life with me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay." They kissed again, slower this time, taking the time to learn each other. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but inside they had found something fierce and warm and undeniable. Eventually, they settled together on the thick rug in front of the fireplace. Eleanor tucked against Declan's side with his arm around her shoulders, and Thunder curled up at their feet. "What will people in Colombia say?" Eleanor asked, though she found she did not really care. "That you have lost your mind, probably. That I have corrupted you or bewitched you or some such nonsense." Declan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Does it matter? Not even a little bit." They stayed up most of the night, talking and kissing and making plans for the future. Declan wanted to build an addition onto the cabin, something that could serve as a proper workspace for Eleanor to pursue whatever interested her. Eleanor wanted to learn everything about mountain life, from tanning hides to identifying medicinal plants. They talked about the possibility of children someday, about how they would manage the winters, about whether they would ever go back to Colombia or if they would live the rest of their lives in happy isolation. "We should probably sleep," Declan said eventually, though he made no move to get up. "The storm will have done more damage than I will need to deal with at first light." "We will need to deal with," Eleanor corrected. "We are partners now, remember? I am not letting you do all the hard work alone." He smiled, that rare, warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Partners. I like the sound of that." They finally dragged themselves to bed as dawn was breaking, and the storm was finally starting to ease. Eleanor fell asleep in her little bedroom, with her heart fuller than it had ever been, listening to Declan moving around in the loft above, and knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning brought clearing skies and the monumental task of assessing storm damage. The fallen pine tree needed to be cut up and hauled away, the garden fence needed major repairs, and several of the trap lines had been damaged by falling branches. But they tackled it together, working side by side, and by the end of the week, things were mostly back to normal. Nita appeared one afternoon while they were working on rebuilding the fence, taking one look at how close Declan and Eleanor were standing and the way they kept smiling at each other, and nodded with satisfaction. "About time," she said simply. "I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out." "You knew?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Child, it was obvious from the moment I saw you together. Declan has never brought anyone to his cabin before, and he looked at you like you had hung the moon." Nita handed her a basket. "Brought you a wedding gift. Herbs and roots for starting your own medicine garden. Every household needs one." "We are not married yet," Declan pointed out. "You will be. Might as well be prepared." Nita's eyes twinkled. "Will you have a ceremony or just announce it?" Declan and Eleanor looked at each other. They had not discussed the specifics, too caught up in the joy of having found each other. "I do not need anything fancy," Eleanor said. but I would like something to mark the occasion. A real commitment. There is a circuit preacher who comes through the territory a few times a year. Declan said slowly. He is due to pass through Colombia in about a month. We could go down, make it official, and be back before the first snow. Or, Netta said, you could have a ceremony here, in the way of my people. It is simple but binding. The land witnesses your vows, and you witness each other's truth. It is just as real as any church wedding, and you do not have to deal with the gossips in Colombia. Eleanor liked the sound of that. The idea of making their promises here, in the valley that had become home, felt right. What do you think? She asked Declan. I think the only opinion that matters is yours. Whatever you want, that is what we will do. They decided on Netta's suggestion. 2 weeks later, on a golden afternoon in early fall, they stood beside the lake with Nita officiating and Thunder as their only other witness. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in the trunk Declan had saved from the fire. Declan wore his best clothes, his hair neatly braided, and looked more nervous than she had ever seen him. Netta had them face each other, holding hands, while she spoke words in her native language that rolled like music across the water. Then she switched to English. The mountain sees you, the water sees you, the sky sees you. Most importantly, you see each other, truly and without pretense. She smiled at them. Declan Lawson, speak your truth to Eleanor Jameson. Declan took a breath. Eleanor, I am not a man of pretty words. But I promise you this. I will keep you safe without caging you. I will love you exactly as you are without trying to change you. I will work beside you every day to build a life worth living. And I will never, ever make you feel like you are too much. You are exactly enough. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. Declan, you saved me from more than just a burning cabin. You saved me from a life of trying to be something I was not. You see me, really see me, and you did not run away. You stayed, and you made room for me in your life. And you taught me that my so-called disasters are just part of learning. I promise to love you through your nightmares and your silences. I promise to be your partner in all things. And I promise to never stop being amazed that I found you. Then by the power of the mountain and the water and the sky, you are bound together, Netta declared. What the land has witnessed, let no person tear apart. They kissed while thunder barked joyfully, and the mountain stood silent, witness to their vows. It was simple and perfect, and Eleanor thought her parents would have approved. That night, they consummated their marriage in the big bed in the cabin's bedroom, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Declan was reverent and careful, always making sure Eleanor was comfortable, and she marveled at how such a strong man could be so tender. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling. No regrets? Declan asked quietly. Not a single one. Eleanor traced patterns on his bare chest, feeling the scars that crossed his skin. You? Regret that I did not ride into Colombia earlier. We could have had more time together. We have all the time in the world now. Eleanor kissed his shoulder. The rest of our lives. The rest of our lives, he repeated, like it was a prayer. I like the sound of that. The days grew shorter as fall deepened into winter. They worked frantically to prepare, smoking meat, preserving vegetables, splitting enough firewood to last through the cold months. Declan taught Eleanor to read the weather and the way the animals behaved and the color of the sky. She taught him songs her mother had sung and read aloud to him in the evenings from the few books she owned. The first snow fell in late October, transforming the valley into something from a fairy tale. Eleanor woke to find everything blanketed in white and Declan already up, feeding the fire high against the cold. "Winter has come," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We will be snowed in for months. Sure you are ready for that much of my company?" "I married you, did I not?" Eleanor stood on her toes to kiss him. "Though I suppose we will find out if that was a terrible mistake." It was not a mistake. The winter, which Eleanor had feared would be isolating and difficult, became the happiest time of her life. They settled into deep rhythms together, working through the necessary daily tasks and then spending long evenings by the fire. Declan carved while Eleanor learned to tan hides, working the leather until it was soft and supple. They played cards and told stories and made love while snow piled high against the cabin walls. Declan's nightmares came sometimes, and Eleanor learned to wake him gently, bringing him back from whatever battlefield haunted his sleep. He would cling to her in the darkness, shaking, and she would hold him and remind him that he was safe, that the war was over, that he was home. "Thank you," he would whisper when the panic passed. "Always," she would whisper back. In February, during a brief break in the weather, Netta appeared with her grandson, a serious young man named Dakota, who helped Declan hunt a deer. They shared a meal together, and Netta pulled Eleanor aside while the men were outside. "You are happy," she observed. It was not a question. "Happier than I ever knew I could be." "Good. Declan needed someone like you. He was forgetting how to be human, spending so much time alone." Netta squeezed her hand. "And you needed someone who would not try to cut you down to size. You are like a tree that grows wild and strong. Trying to prune you into a neat shape would kill your spirit. Is that why you brought the herbs for a medicine garden? Because you knew I would stay? I hoped you would stay. You both deserve to find each other." Netta smiled. "Have you thought about children yet?" Eleanor blushed. "We have talked about it. We will see what happens." What happened was that by early spring, Eleanor realized her monthly courses had stopped. She was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, waiting until she was certain before telling Declan. She chose a moment when they were working together in the garden, planting the first seeds of the year. The snow had finally melted, and green shoots were pushing up through the earth, and everything smelled like renewal and possibility. "Declan," she said, setting down her trowel, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the row he was digging, immediately alert to her serious tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. I am pregnant." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming him into someone almost boyish with joy. He crossed the garden in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. The signs are all there." Eleanor laughed, dizzy with relief at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it." He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "When?" "Late fall, I think. Before the snow comes again, hopefully." They sat in the dirt of the garden, holding hands, imagining the future. A child growing up wild and free in the mountains, learning to read tracks and identify plants and split firewood. A child who would be loved without conditions, who would never be told they were too much or not enough. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" Declan asked. "I do not care either way, as long as they are healthy." "They will have your courage and your heart," Declan said softly. "And hopefully my common sense about not running into burning buildings." Eleanor laughed. "We can hope." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and summer. Eleanor's body changed, her belly swelling with new life, and Declan became impossibly more protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or climb anything high, hovering anxiously whenever she moved too fast. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor protested after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know. But humor me. I have never done this before, and I do not want to mess it up." Netta visited more frequently as Eleanor's time drew near, teaching her what to expect and what preparations to make. She brought herbs for easing labor pain, and soft clothes for the baby, and a cradle that her grandson had carved. "You will do fine," Netta assured Eleanor when she confessed her fears about childbirth. "Your body knows what to do. Just trust it." The baby came on a crisp October evening, just as the aspens were turning gold. Eleanor's water broke while she was making dinner, and Declan, who had stayed calm through blizzards and bear encounters, went white as a sheet. "Get Netta," Eleanor said through gritted teeth as a contraction seized her. "Now." Declan practically flew down the mountain to Netta's camp. He returned an hour later with both Nita and 2 women from her tribe who had experience with births. They shooed him out of the cabin and got to work. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Eleanor had never known pain like this, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. But Nita held her hand and spoke calmly, and the other women supported her weight when she needed to stand and walk. "You are doing so well," Netta said. "I can see the head. Just a few more pushes." Eleanor bore down with everything she had, and suddenly there was a release of pressure and the sound of a baby crying. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and exhilarated. "A boy," Netta announced, placing the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his red face and his tiny fists waving in outrage, and felt love crash over her like a wave. He was perfect. Every finger, every toe. Absolutely perfect. "Can I come in?" Declan's voice called anxiously from outside. Yes. Come meet your son." Declan entered the cabin with Thunder at his heels. He crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby, and Eleanor saw tears tracking down his face into his beard. "He is beautiful," Declan whispered. "You are beautiful. Thank you." They named him Daniel, after Declan's father, who had died when he was young. Daniel Lawson, born in a mountain cabin and welcomed into the world by 3 Native American women, a dog and 2 parents who loved him more than life itself. The first year of Daniel's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a good baby, healthy and curious, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Eleanor learned to function on broken sleep and to nurse while doing other tasks, and to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry and a something is wrong cry. Declan was a devoted father, spending hours just watching Daniel sleep or carrying him in a sling while he worked. He sang to him in a surprisingly good baritone and made him laugh by pretending to be a bear. Eleanor would sometimes find them napping together in the afternoon. Daniel sprawled across Declan's broad chest, both of them snoring softly. "You are a natural at this," Eleanor told him one evening. "So are you, despite what you thought." It was true. Eleanor, who had failed at so many things, found that motherhood came relatively easily. Oh, there were hard moments and mistakes, and times when she felt like she had no idea what she was doing. But she learned and adapted and kept trying, and that seemed to be enough. When Daniel was 6 months old, they decided to make a trip to Colombia. Eleanor wanted to register his birth officially, and they needed supplies that could not be made or traded for in the mountains. Also, if she was being honest, she wanted to show off her son to the people who had written her off as hopeless. They rode down on a clear spring day with Daniel bundled in a sling against Declan's chest and Thunder trotting alongside. Columbia looked exactly the same, dusty and weathered, slowly declining as the gold played out and people moved on to more prosperous places. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People stopped to stare at the mountain man and his family, whispering behind their hands. Eleanor saw Mrs. Henderson's jaw literally drop when she recognized her. They went first to the general store to place their order. Mr. Peterson, who had always been kind, exclaimed over how healthy Eleanor looked and how beautiful her baby was. "Marriage and motherhood clearly agree with you, Miss Jameson. Or I suppose it is Mrs. Lawson now." "It is. And yes, it agrees with me very much." Samuel Grant appeared while they were waiting for their order to be filled. He looked Eleanor up and down, taking in her practical clothing, her sun-bronzed skin, the baby in Declan's arms. "Eleanor, I heard you were back in town." His voice was stiff. "I see you have been busy." "Very busy. This is my son, Daniel." Eleanor's voice was warm with pride. "Daniel, this is Mr. Grant. We knew each other a long time ago." Samuel barely glanced at the baby. "I assume you have realized your mistake by now. Living in the wilderness like animals, raising a child in such primitive conditions. If you want to come back, to give your son a proper upbringing, I am sure arrangements could be made." Declan went very still, his jaw tightening. But before he could speak, Eleanor stepped forward. "Let me be very clear, Samuel. I have no regrets about my choices. My husband is a good man who treats me as an equal partner. My son is healthy and loved. I have meaningful work and a home I built with my own hands. I am happier than I ever was, pretending to be something I was not for people like you." She smiled, and there was steel in it. "So thank you for your concern. But no, I will not be coming back." "You will regret this," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The only thing I regret is wasting time trying to please people who did not deserve the effort." Eleanor turned back to Declan and Daniel, dismissing Samuel as thoroughly as if he had never existed. "Are we done here? I want to introduce Daniel to Netta's grandson. He made the most beautiful cradle, and I want to thank him properly." They left Columbia that afternoon with their supplies and never looked back. The town faded behind them as they climbed into the mountains, and Eleanor felt nothing but relief. "You handled that well," Declan said as they walked. "I meant every word. That life nearly crushed me. This life, hard as it is sometimes, makes me feel alive." Daniel gurgled in agreement from his sling, and they both laughed. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Daniel grew from a baby into a rambunctious toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to imitate everything Declan did. He was fearless and curious, constantly getting into things he should not. He was, Eleanor reflected with amusement, exactly as much work as she had been as a child. When Daniel was 3, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and though the pregnancy was harder than the first, she delivered a healthy daughter in the spring. They named her Catherine, after Eleanor's mother. Catherine was completely different from her brother. Where Daniel was bold, she was thoughtful. Where he rushed into everything, she watched carefully first, but she was just as strong-willed. And by the time she could walk, she and Daniel were constant companions, exploring the valley together under their parents' watchful eyes. Declan built an addition onto the cabin to give the children their own room, and Eleanor planted more of the garden to keep up with their growing family's needs. They fell into new rhythms, juggling the needs of two children with the demands of mountain life. "Are we going to end up with a whole pack of children?" Declan asked one night, after a particularly exhausting day of chasing toddlers. "Would you mind if we did?" He pulled her close. "Not even a little bit. I love our family." But they did not have more children. Catherine remained the youngest, and as she and Daniel grew, the cabin filled with noise and laughter and the thousand small dramas of childhood. Daniel was 7 and Catherine 4 when they had their first real scare. The children had been playing by the lake while Eleanor worked in the garden nearby. She had looked away for just a moment, and when she looked back, she could not see them. Her heart lurched with panic. "Daniel, Catherine." No answer. She ran toward the lake, terrible scenarios playing through her mind. Drowning, a bear, one of them hurt and the other unable to call for help. She found them around the bend of the lake, crouched by the water's edge examining something in the shallows. They looked up guiltily when she came crashing through the underbrush. "Sorry, Mama," Daniel said. "We found a turtle and wanted to follow it." Eleanor collapsed onto the ground, her legs suddenly shaky. "You cannot wander off like that without telling me. I was terrified." "But you could see us from the garden," Catherine protested with a 4-year-old's logic. "Except I could not, because you went around the bend. What if something had happened to you?" Daniel's lower lip trembled. He was old enough to understand he had done something wrong. "We're sorry, Mama. We will not do it again." Eleanor pulled them both into a fierce hug. "I know you are growing up and you want to explore, but you have to be smart about it. Always tell an adult where you're going. Always." When she told Declan about the incident that evening, he turned pale. They could have drowned or gotten lost or 100 other things. "I know. We need to set clearer boundaries." Eleanor sighed. "But how do we do that without making them afraid of everything? I do not want to raise timid children. We will teach them to be cautious without being fearful, the way Gus taught me." Declan thought for a moment. "Starting tomorrow, I am going to take Daniel out every day and teach him proper mountain skills. Tracking, orienteering, what to do if he gets lost. And when Catherine is old enough, she will get the same lessons." It became their new routine. Declan took the children out daily, teaching them everything he knew about survival and safety. Eleanor worked with them on reading and writing and mathematics, using Neda's stories to make lessons engaging. The children grew up literate and capable, as comfortable in the wilderness as most children were in town. When Daniel was 10 and Catherine 7, they finally made another trip to Columbia. The town had shrunk noticeably in the years since their last visit. Several buildings stood empty, and the streets that had once bustled were now quiet. "Everything changes," Declan said as they rode through. "Towns die just like anything else." They were registering Catherine's birth at the county office when they ran into Samuel Grant. He was older now, graying at the temples, and he had a harried-looking wife and 3 children in tow. He did a double take when he recognized them. "Eleanor? Declan?" He looked at the children. "These are yours?" "Yes, Daniel and Catherine." Eleanor put a protective hand on each child's shoulder. "They are getting so big I can barely believe it." Samuel's wife was looking at Eleanor with naked envy. "You look so well, so healthy and happy." "Mountain living agrees with us." Eleanor smiled at the woman. "And you? Are you well?" "We manage." But the woman's voice lacked enthusiasm, and Eleanor noticed the way Samuel stood apart from his family, not touching or even looking at them. They made polite conversation for a few minutes before parting ways. Daniel, perceptive as always, waited until they were out of earshot before asking, "Was that the man who wanted you to come back to town?" "Yes." "He seems sad." "He chose a life that makes him sad," Declan explained. "Your mother chose a life that makes her happy. That is an important difference." They stayed in Colombia only long enough to complete their business and restock supplies, then headed back into the mountains with relief. That night, lying in their bed while the children slept in the next room, Eleanor traced the familiar scars on Declan's chest. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we had stayed in civilization?" she asked. "Sometimes, but I am always glad we did not." He caught her hand and pressed it over his heart. "This life is hard, but it is real, and I get to live it with you. That is worth more than any comfort civilization could offer." "They said I was too much work," Eleanor whispered. "Everyone said it. And I said loving you is the easiest work I will ever do. I meant it then, and I mean it now." Declan pulled her closer. "Every single day with you is easy because it is right. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." They made love quietly that night, conscious of their sleeping children nearby, then fell asleep tangled together the way they always did. The years continued their steady march. Daniel grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and careful hands. Catherine developed her mother's curiosity and her father's patience, asking endless questions about everything. They were good children, mostly, though not perfect. They fought with each other sometimes and tested boundaries and made mistakes. But they were loved, absolutely, and they knew it. When Daniel was 15, he announced he wanted to learn to trap on his own, to start building independence. Declan was proud but cautious, making Daniel prove his skills over and over before finally agreeing to let him run a small trap line by himself. "He is so young," Eleanor fretted, watching Daniel set out on his first solo trip. "He is the same age I was when I went to war, and he is far better prepared for the mountains than I was for battle." Declan put his arm around her. "He will be fine. We taught him well." Daniel returned 3 days later with a string of rabbits and stories of his adventures. He had navigated by the stars, built proper shelter, and avoided a bear encounter by reading the signs and changing his route. Declan clapped him on the shoulder with fierce pride, and Eleanor made his favorite dinner to celebrate. Catherine, not to be outdone, demanded to learn herb lore from Neda. She had always been fascinated by plants and their properties, and Neda took her on as a serious student. By the time she was 12, Catherine could identify hundreds of plants and knew which ones healed and which ones harmed. "She has a gift," Neda told Eleanor. "She sees things clearly, understands the relationships between living things. She will be a great healer someday if she chooses that path." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride. Her daughter, who had been born in a mountain cabin and raised without formal schooling, had found her calling through curiosity and determination. The winter that Daniel turned 17 brought the worst blizzard Eleanor had seen in all her years on the mountain. Snow fell for 5 straight days, piling up past the windows and burying the outbuildings. They were trapped inside, rationing firewood and trying to keep their spirits up as the temperature dropped dangerously low. On the 3rd day, they heard a sound outside. Not the wind, but something else. An animal in distress. Declan grabbed his coat. "Something is out there." "You cannot go out in this," Eleanor protested. "You will freeze." "If it is hurt, it is suffering. I cannot leave it." He looked at Daniel. "Coming?" Father and son bundled up and ventured into the whiteout, while Eleanor and Catherine waited anxiously inside. They were gone for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When they returned, they were carrying something wrapped in Declan's coat. A wolf pup, nearly frozen, thin with starvation. Found it huddled by the woodpile, Declan said, bringing it close to the fire. Pack must have abandoned it when the storm hit. It is too weak to survive on its own. They spent the rest of the blizzard nursing the pup back to health. It drank a water mixed with broth and slowly regained strength. By the time the storm cleared, it was eating solid food and following Catherine around like a shadow. "We should let it go," Declan said, though his tone was doubtful. "It is a wild animal." "It will die if we release it now," Catherine argued. "The pack will not take it back, and it is too young to hunt alone. Please, Papa, let me try to help it." Declan looked at Eleanor, who shrugged. "We took in a disaster of a woman once. Why not a wolf pup?" Catherine named the pup Shadow and devoted herself to its care. Against all odds, the wolf bonded with the family, especially Catherine. It never became fully domesticated like Thunder, who had passed away peacefully a few years before. But it stayed close to the cabin and hunted in partnership with the family dogs they had acquired over the years. "Only our daughter would end up with a pet wolf," Eleanor said, watching Catherine and Shadow play in the snow. "She is your daughter," Declan pointed out. Of course she would do the unexpected. When Daniel was 18, he made an announcement that both thrilled and terrified his parents. He wanted to go into town for a year to see more of the world before deciding where to settle permanently. "I love the mountain," he said earnestly, "but I want to know if there is anything else out there calling to me. You understand, do not you?" Eleanor did understand, though letting him go was one of the hardest things she had ever done. They outfitted him with good clothes and money from selling furs and her blessing, even though her heart ached at the thought of him leaving. "Write to us," she said, hugging him tightly. "Tell us everything." "I will, Mama, I promise." They watched him ride away toward Columbia and the world beyond, and Eleanor cried into Declan's shoulder. "He will come back," Declan said softly. "The mountain is in his blood. He just needs to make sure for himself." Declan was right. Daniel's letters arrived regularly through the county office, full of descriptions of towns and cities and the ocean. He tried various jobs and met various people. But after a year, he returned home with relief plain on his face. "It is all so loud," he said. "So many people, all crowded together, all hurrying around for things that do not seem to matter. I kept thinking about the silence of the mountain, the way you can hear yourself think up here." "So you are staying?" Catherine asked hopefully. She had missed her brother fiercely. "I am staying, though maybe not in this cabin forever." Daniel looked at his parents. "I want to build my own place, start my own trap lines. Maybe eventually find someone to share it with. But I want to do that here, in these mountains. This is where I belong." Eleanor and Declan helped Daniel choose a spot about 3 miles from their cabin, close enough for regular contact, but far enough for independence. They spent the summer helping him build, the whole family working together the way they always had. By fall, Daniel had a snug cabin of his own and was running a successful trap line. The years passed, each one bringing changes, but also continuity. Catherine stayed home longer, studying with Nita and developing her healing skills. She had several suitors from Nita's tribe, young men drawn to her combination of beauty and competence. But she turned them all away. "Have you not found anyone who interests you?" Eleanor asked one day while they worked together in the garden. "I have found several people who interest me," Catherine said, "but none who interest me enough to give up my independence. Maybe that will change someday. Maybe it will not. Either way, I am content." Eleanor smiled. Her daughter had learned the lesson she herself had taken so long to understand, that you did not need someone else to complete you. You could be whole on your own and choose to share your life if and when you found the right person. When Eleanor was 45, Netta passed away in her sleep. The funeral was held in the traditional way of her people, and Eleanor wept for the woman who had blessed her marriage and delivered her children and been a second mother to her all these years. "She lived a good life," Netta's grandson Dakota said at the gathering. "And she loved you all. You were her mountain family." They continued Netta's tradition of the medicine garden, Catherine taking over completely and expanding it with her knowledge. People from Netta's tribe, and occasionally from the few remaining families in Colombia, would come to the cabin seeking healing. And Catherine treated them all with the same careful attention. Daniel eventually met a woman from a neighboring valley, a trapper's daughter who could shoot as well as he could and who loved the mountain as much as he did. They married in a simple ceremony beside his cabin, with both families present. 2 years later, Daniel and Marie had a son of their own, making Eleanor and Declan grandparents. "I cannot believe we are old enough to be grandparents," Eleanor said, holding her grandson for the first time. "Speak for yourself. I have always been old." But Declan's eyes were soft as he looked at the baby. "He is perfect, just like his father was." Catherine remained single but was never alone, surrounded by friends from various tribes and communities who valued her skills. She took over more and more of the daily work around the cabin as Eleanor and Declan aged, though both of them remained active and capable. "You do not have to stay and take care of us," Eleanor told her daughter when Catherine was 30. "If you want to build your own life somewhere, we will manage." "This is my life," Catherine said simply. "Right here, with the medicine garden and the mountain and my family nearby. I do not need anything else." The years continued to turn. Daniel and Marie had 2 more children, daughters this time, who ran wild through the mountains just like their father had. The family gathered regularly. The cabin that had once held just Eleanor and Declan now filled with the chaos of grandchildren and their various animal companions. Eleanor was 60 when she and Declan celebrated 30 years of marriage. They marked the occasion by hiking to a peak they had not climbed in years, just the 2 of them, leaving Catherine to manage the grandchildren. At the summit, they sat together, looking out over the vast wilderness they had made their home. Declan's hair was completely silver now, his beard streaked with white. Eleanor's dark hair had threads of gray running through it, and her hands showed the weathering of decades of hard work. But when they looked at each other, they were still the young people who had stood beside the lake and made promises to each other. "No regrets?" Declan asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night so long ago. "Not a single one." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. "You told me that loving me was the easiest work you would ever do. Did it stay easy?" "Every single day, even the hard days." He wrapped his arm around her. "You are still my favorite person in the world. That has never changed." "They said I was too much work," Eleanor said softly. "But you proved them all wrong." "No, you proved them all wrong. By being exactly who you were meant to be and refusing to apologize for it." Declan pressed a kiss to her temple. "I just had the good sense to recognize it." They sat on the mountain peak until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Then they made their way carefully back down, hand in hand, to the cabin full of family and the life they had built together. Over the next decade, they gradually slowed down. Declan's war injuries began to catch up with him, old wounds aching in the cold. Eleanor's hands developed arthritis that made fine work difficult. But they adapted, accepting help from their children when they needed it, and continuing to contribute what they could. They were both in their 70s when Declan fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia. Catherine used all her healing skills, but they all knew he was fading. "I am not afraid," Declan told Eleanor one night as she sat beside his bed. "I have lived a good life, the best life. Please do not leave me," Eleanor whispered, holding his hand. "I do not know how to do this without you." "Yes, you do. You are the strongest person I know." His voice was weak but certain. "You survived before you met me, and you will survive after I am gone. But I will always be with you. Every mountain, every tree, every star, I will be there." He died peacefully in his sleep a few days later, with Eleanor beside him and their children close by. They buried him on the hillside overlooking the lake, with a simple marker that read, "Declan Lawson, beloved husband and father, home at last." Eleanor thought the grief might destroy her. For weeks, she moved through the cabin like a ghost, unable to accept that Declan was really gone. But slowly, with Catherine's gentle presence and the demands of daily life, she began to heal. "He is still here," Catherine said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Can you feel him?" Eleanor could. In the wind through the pines, in the way the firelight danced, in the patterns of stars overhead. Declan had become part of the mountain he loved, and the mountain kept him close. She lived for another 5 years after Declan's death, watching her grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She taught them the stories of how she had come to the mountain, how their grandfather had saved her from a burning cabin, and she had saved him from loneliness. "He said loving me was the easiest work he ever did," she would tell them. "Remember that. Love should not be a burden. It should be a joy." Eleanor passed away peacefully on a spring morning, sitting in her chair on the porch with the sun on her face. Catherine found her with a smile on her lips, as if she had seen something wonderful just before the end. They buried her beside Declan on the hillside. Her marker read, "Eleanor Jameson Lawson, beloved wife and mother, finally home." Daniel and Catherine continued to live on the mountain, raising their families in the traditions their parents had established. The cabin remained in the family for generations, each one adding to it and improving it, while keeping the core that Declan had built with his own hands. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people claimed they could hear laughter coming from the hillside, where Declan and Eleanor rested together. The mountain had witnessed their vows, and the mountain kept them close, just as they had kept each other close through all the years of their remarkable life together. The story of the woman who was too much work and the mountain man who said loving her was the easiest work he would ever do became legend in those mountains. It was told around campfires and passed down through generations as a reminder that the right love does not demand you be anything other than yourself. That real partnership is built on acceptance and respect and the willingness to work side by side through whatever comes. And high in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, in a valley where a lake reflects the sky and pine trees whisper in the wind, their legacy lives on. A cabin still stands where disaster and salvation met and became something beautiful. Where two people who did not fit in the civilized world built something better in the wilderness. Where love proved to be not a burden, but the easiest, most natural thing in the world. The mountain remembers. The mountain holds them close, and their story, like the mountains themselves, endures.